You have to jump through a lot of hoops if you're making an MCP server for your business. Our team, we're building an MCP server right now. We have to think about threat modeling in a different way. Luckily, there's changes to the spec that are coming out that are making it more secure. That doesn't mean your job is done. What's the authorization look like if it's talking to a service? How potentially could you use like prompt injection? All of kind of the pen testing, white hat thinking here to make sure that if you are building MCP servers just inside your enterprise, security didn't go away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Osell, VP of Innovation at This.Labs, joined by my very favorite co-host, Danny Thompson. Danny is the Director of Technology at This.Labs. Danny, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm here. We got a great guest. I think this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, we're going to jump right in because I think we're going to save the hot topic for invite the guest to join us this time. We are joined today by Wes Ecklan. Wes is a software engineer at AWS ProServe. Wes, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, Rob. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. How you guys doing?
Pretty good. Can't complain. Yeah, I think we've been talking about it way too much on this podcast, but I just enjoying the fall. We got early fall in the spring down here in the South, and I am loving it.
Yeah, we got the leaves. We got the leaves changing colors up here. You know, Oktoberfest is a thing up here, so it's just the perfect time. Football, of course. You know.
Yeah, I always tell people I grew up in Minnesota, and so they're always just like, "How do you live in the cold in Minnesota?" I said, "The exact same way you live in the hot in the South. You don't go out in it. It's so weird for me to have a kid, and like a big part of the summer, they just don't go outside because it's just trying to murder them."
Yeah, no, I mean, I spent time in Phoenix, and I was trying to understand in the beginning, it's like, oh, you just don't go outside, right? So whether it's in the hot or in the cold, right?
Yeah.
So I like this time of year, it feels like everyone can actually come out.
Well, Wes, I think we're going to have a fun conversation about a lot of things about practical AI use and a bunch of other topics. But one of the things that you do and you talk about a lot online is kind of both your experiences and your experiences helping people go through the interview process, the job hunt process, breaking into tech, and sharing the path that you've taken. And I think for us to start out, I thought it'd be fun to just sort of check in. I mean, we're in a situation, in an economy where a lot of people are out there looking for jobs right now, trying to break through, trying to cut through the noise. And, you know, Danny, I know you see this kind of stuff, a lot of the same things over and over again. So my first question to you guys is, what are some of the mistakes you're seeing either from aspiring junior developers or even senior and mid-level developers, that the types of mistakes that are really preventing them from getting the kind of job that they're trying to get?
Yeah, I can go first. So, you know, I conduct quite a few interviews at AWS, all software engineers. And, you know, the two big things is the coding technical portion and the behavioral portion. And I think one is it's pretty obvious within the first few minutes that you haven't actually practiced the problem solving process. Whether, you know, that's asking the right questions, so key. I mean, honestly, in both the coding and the behavioral side, asking follow-up questions, really understanding the problem space. And then I just mentioned it, but at least at Amazon, and I think it's from what I've talked to other companies, is really the behavioral part. A lot of candidates will do leak code, you know, spend several hours every day for weeks or months, and if they've seen a similar problem, they may be able to solve it. But if I ask you about your experiences, and specifically, like, I may ask a question about specifically trying to suss out what you've learned from a mistake you've made, you know, I think it really trips up a lot of candidates. And then we can kind of go into like how AI can play a part in that too.
Yeah, I think there's so many issues that I see, to be honest with you. And part of it is because the market has shifted in a dramatic way that I don't think, especially at the senior and staff level, that they don't really account for it. This is not really a junior issue, to be completely honest with you. One of the biggest issues that have risen has been developers have never had to advocate for their skill set because the market has always favored developers. So the fact that the competition levels have basically reached a point where you are competing the way that anybody in the finance sector is competing, or anyone that is trying to become a lawyer is competing for opportunities, where they're advocating for their skills and they're trying to prove it. This is something that really hasn't existed in the world of tech prior to this. And I don't necessarily think that's going to change anytime soon. There's a lot of data that I've seen personally that shows that this will be the norm. And a lot of developers are struggling to figure out what that even looks like. And so I've kind of coined a phrase that I kind of call the Thrive framework. And essentially the Thrive framework will help anybody pass any kind of behavioral interview, tech or not. But really it's a really, really good starting point. So Thrive stands for, the T stands for targeted research. So obviously researching the company, the orgs, etc. The H stands for honest narratives. So making sure we're not saying something fictitious that doesn't exist, but the narrative needs to be honest and real, and you need to be able to speak on at length anything that is on your resume, your LinkedIn, etc., etc. The I stands for interactive engagement. When you walk into an interview, it's by nature and by default an interrogation. How are you turning that into more of an organic conversation and asking questions back, right? The V stands for validation of yourself in alignment with the role. So you're making sure that you actually align with it and vice versa, because if I'm dedicating the next, let's say on average I spend 2,000 hours a week at a company. If I'm there for 3 years, I'm giving them 6,000 hours of my life. Do I actually align with the role, and does the company also align with me, back and forth both ways? Like, do I want to dedicate 6,000 hours of my life to a place that I really don't want to be? What did I cover? I missed one. I missed R because I went straight to I. So R is results focused. What results have you actually delivered? What have you been able to talk about? What metrics do you have around that? I gave I, and I gave V, which is a validation of alignment, and then E, it's kind of a two for. It's elevated impact and extended dialogue. So what impacts have you made, and how do you extend the dialogue further? So what are you ending the interviews with, and things like that. One of my key things that you can always kind of look for is every interview has a certain number of questions that are pretty much guaranteed to be asked. One being, tell me about yourself. I can guarantee is almost in every single interview. But the last question is usually, do you have any questions for me? A sign of a good interview that you know you've done at least decent at is, I did have questions walking into this, but I've asked them all in the interview. So I don't have any additional ones right now because I've already asked them all through this dialogue. So I guess the only real question I have at this point is, what can I do on my side to ensure that the ball keeps rolling in the right direction? That's kind of my metric for success as far as like the interview going, and what you would see there.
So I was actually looking at some notes that I made back when I was preparing for my interviews at Amazon. And I would basically write notes during my prep, and then after I got the offer, I'd kind of turn them into just kind of like some X image posts. And something that was said earlier that I think was really powerful about doing the research and finding out how the company's value align with your own. One of the things that I took was really, really powerful during my prep was not just, in this case, I was interviewing for a few big tech companies and researching their core values. I really tried to make sure that I read and actually see how that aligned with my own personal values. So even if ones that I didn't actually agree with, just because I'd gone through that process, that will help you remember, oh, these are the things that they care about, right? Like, let's say of the 10 values, you agree and want to work for a company with like 8 out of the 10, and you don't agree with 2. Well, because you've at least gone through that exercise with yourself, and let's say you get a question where it's obvious to you, like, oh yeah, they're talking about customer obsession. Maybe I don't agree with that. If you can actually articulate your thinking around that idea to the interviewer, that's going to show you've at least done your homework, you've done your research. And then I'll just say 2 quick other ones that I think really helped me, kind of tactical things. Right, you're going to be asked more than just one question. I think our interview process is more or less kind of well known in the prep document, but you will get questions, behavioral questions, in your technical interviews. Right, so you may have 4 or 5 interviews, all of them with behavioral questions. You may have 10 behavioral questions you need to answer. And if you only have like 1 or 2 honest narratives, you're going to be repeating those narratives to different candidates. And then when they come back to debrief as a committee, they're going to see like, oh yeah, I heard that story. Oh yeah, I heard that story. Right? So going through the exercise, I like STAR format. I think everyone has their format for narratives: situation, task, action, result. I like to make sure that I prep 5 narratives using the STAR format. And then the last thing is, being okay with asking for a little bit of time to answer the question. So let's say I ask a question like, tell me about a time where you failed to collaborate with a peer. Oof, that's kind of got like a hook on it, right? Like asking for a little bit of time to kind of decipher what's the signal that the interviewer is looking for. In this case, it's the interviewer is looking for a time where you failed something and they want to know what you learned from it, right? Whereas if you just try to answer from the jump, you may try and turn it around and say, oh, well, I didn't fail, right? It's like, for that question, if you think about it, the interviewer is looking for honesty and a lesson learned, right? So taking that time to allow yourself to be patient, and then having multiple narratives, I think, can really, really help you go far in those interviews.
We'll be back to the episode in a second, but first I'd like to acknowledge the team behind the channel, This.Labs. We're seeing 3x to 5x productivity improvements with our teams and clients using tools like Cursor, Claude Code, and GitHub Copilot. We help teams adopt these technologies and get max value out of them through strategic partnerships, trainings, and other software engineering services. Check us out at ai.this.co. Thanks, now back to the video.
Interesting. I mean, I appreciate that. I don't have a framework, guys, but I will say that from the hiring and the things that we see, when you're not necessarily at a large company, but all across the board is, discipline includes the ability to stay focused and to keep your quality up at every at bat. I mean, I know some people, they've been applying to so many jobs, so many times their resume doesn't even get read because it just gets AI screened or whatever else. And I will tell you that we had a human review every CV that came in for a recent job posting, and the amount of times there were things missing or typos, or literally it's formatted goofy, like it's in landscape mode instead of portrait or whatever. And it's just like, you missed, like you lost an at-bat just out of kind of not paying attention to the little things that were in your control. And you don't know when you're going to break through. You don't know when your opportunity is going to come, and you can't guarantee it'll come again. So you can't afford to have your worst foot forward. And it kind of sucks if you've been putting in that much work to get a job these days, and you're applying to so many things, but part of that discipline, part of what's going to get that results, I guess, is just keeping that focus up, because it really sucks to see someone get disqualified that maybe would have been good, but they just didn't put the effort in at the very first step. And that can be really difficult. Great. Well, let's move on to another topic, Wes. I mean, I know I was listening to a podcast with you recently, and it really struck me. You were talking about your experience with 100 Days of Code, and we're going to be talking a lot about AI and practical uses of AI. One of the questions I get asked a lot by juniors is, should I be using AI? Right? Some people say that juniors are going to be not well served by AI because it will mean that they don't learn how to code. They do everything through the AI. They become too dependent on it. Others say you have to learn it because it's part of the job. What do you say, especially to people that might be going through 100 Days of Code or things like that? What would 100 Days of Code look like in the AI age now?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And, I think it comes down to how you're using AI for strategic thinking versus the learning process. So, the strategic thinking, let's say you have a goal and you want to work backwards from that goal. So I had learned about 100 Days of Code just by being on X, Twitter at the time, and just seeing how powerful it was to just be cooking every single day, logging about it, and seeing just kind of that slow compounding interest of learning something and learning through the community. Let's say you're someone that your goal is to get into a job somewhere. Let's just say, for this example, big tech, which was my scenario. And how do I structure a process to do that? Well, AI can be super helpful there to say, hey, this is my goal. Help me work backwards in 3 months, let's say, to figure that out. AI could very well come back with 100 Days of Code, right, as part of your strategy. Now, maybe what you might not want to do with AI in your 100 Days of Code is then say, hey, I just got this leak code question and I'm timed 30 minutes. Here's the question, what's the answer? Right, you're doing yourself a big disservice. But let's give another example where maybe you did a leak code question in 30 minutes and you got a naive solution, but you didn't get the optimal. Well, after it's done, not during the session, but afterwards, you could then say, hey, this is how I was thinking about the problem. Here's the problem, you know, what are some hints? And like, maybe afterwards, you're using AI to help teach you to get better versus you just kind of spit out the answer, right? So I think those are kind of two examples that maybe I would give, that whatever your goals are, especially using 100 Days of Code, whatever the goal is, use AI to help you kind of strategically think through working backwards. And then when you do use it, make sure it's in a very like teacher-student model, not a looking over your shoulder to a classmate, right, to get the answer.
So I'll explain this. You know, for me, with 100 Days of Code, the idea is there's no reward if you complete it, and there's no punishment if you fail. But it's a personal challenge with yourself. And the idea here is, what are you doing to make that challenge worthwhile? Because if you were to give yourself, let's say, 100 days of gym, you could go walk on the treadmill for a couple minutes and just say that was a successful activity, where then you could say, you know what, maybe by the end of this 100 days, I would love to see my bench press improve by certain weights, measurements, or the efficiency of what I feel pushing it through. Like, your goal is going to determine that. And so I often look at 100 Days of Code as, this is my opportunity to really say, outside of work, outside of anything that I'm doing, I'm using this as a way to just progress myself forward towards something, right? And I personally like 100 Days of Code. I don't ever really announce it online like I used to in the beginning. Now it's just more so a challenge between me, because I like to really just test myself sometimes. And plus, a 100-day test, you know, is not the worst thing in the world to kind of commit yourself to at times, right? But I will say, like, especially around AI, I've been using it as a way to kind of just keep myself accountable towards, hey, have you learned something new today towards this goal? And the idea being, obviously, AI is the shiny new object for a lot of individuals. So it's like, how am I leveraging it? Because obviously at this stop, we do a ton of AI enablement in general, and we're working with a lot of companies, and I want to make sure I'm not just knowledgeable, but I'm knowledgeable on like the small details, because that's where a lot of the deeper questions start coming from. The broad strokes are great, but when people start asking granular questions that are going down to like minute little differences, that's where you need to really expand your knowledge. And so we're using AI a lot at work. I would like to think that I'm very AI forward in a lot of conversations. But I mean, are you doing something similar, Wes? Like, how are you using AI at work? And I guess, how has maybe your learning adjusted towards that, since all this is pretty new anyway?
Yeah, excellent question. And it's changing literally every day. I feel pretty fortunate. There are a lot of resources internally to help you level up. But one of the big things that have kind of opened up just a huge range of value for us in our day-to-day work is MCP servers, right? So you have a design task and you have these requirements from the business, and you need to be like, okay, I need to add XYZ feature. Okay, how do I design that feature? What's the architecture? What, in this case, AWS, what services do I need to use to accomplish that feature? How do I think about data retention, log retention? How do I think about threat modeling, right? Where now, if I'm using, in this case, it's not a plug, this is just what all of our tooling is connected to, but the Amazon Q CLI, we have it connect to all of our internal kind of wikis, code, documents. So as I'm designing a feature, I can say, hey, you know, I'm thinking about S3. I may want to use TimeStream. What do you think? And then now it's going to be able to pull from, you know, potentially the hundreds, thousands of other technical documents, design documents that other people have written, pull that in as context. It can go fetch other code repos. What are the design patterns? Go bring them in as context. Right? And so it helps me design faster. But then also what was really powerful is we had a summer intern on our team this year, and normally in the past, it's a very, very long onboarding process to not just how the way Amazon does things, AWS, our org, our team, but then also the system, the language, and oh my gosh, this person was making pull requests at the end of like the week. Like the amount that he was able to get versus just like searching all these hundreds of different sources of like, how do I learn how to do things? They were such more productive, faster than I've ever seen in my tenure thus far. So, it's helping me with design work. It's helping new members ramp up faster. And I think there's just going to be more and more use cases like that continues.
How do you split your time between refining something that that works, or using something that that works, and playing with a new workflow that may or may not work? We're all busy. We have goals. We have objectives. Like, how do you carve up your time to learn new things or to innovate versus just executing efficiently with patterns you already know?
That's the billion-dollar question right there.
And I'd like $1 billion. So,
X is still, I think, top dog in like bubbling up value content to the top. I still try and I don't join as many spaces as I used to, but I get so much inspiration from other people on X and internally too. We have a pretty big Slack group internally, but just the net new ideas, and not only that, but having the researchers and the folks actually writing these research papers within a tweet away or a post away to talking to them, asking their questions, meeting up for a video call. X still gives me so much inspiration on like what's the net new workflow, and I don't try it right away. I think I probably instinctively look for some sort of escape velocity or some signal that it's like, okay, it's not just like one post that happened this week that went viral. It's like, no, people that I follow that are hardcore, staff engineers, researchers, they're all saying, oh, this is cool, you should try this out. That's, I think, usually when I decide, okay, maybe I should look at this. So that's kind of my heuristic. I don't really have a good, just well-defined answer for it.
Does your team allocate some amount of resources towards innovation? Because what I've started to realize is that there are some teams which don't realize they have a problem, but their problem is that they have hired a certain amount of people, attached them to a task, and then given them just enough time to allocate 100% of their time to that task. And then, if that team, if they just by miracle happen to retain those people, they realize that 3 years down the road, they have exactly the same engineers they had at the beginning, because they just don't budget any time for improvement or sharing results. And I'm just curious if you've had better experiences with the teams that you've been working with.
Yeah, so I'll say two things. So one, at Amazon, there are tons of different dev office hours. If you want to spend the time to learn something, you have the opportunity to do that. I think it's one of the big kind of benefits of big tech. It's still just like a fire hose. You can still just, anything you want to look at, what other teams are doing, you can go at your own detriment of your own capacity to your own tasks, right? That's kind of the balance that we were just talking about. My team specifically, we try and do, we've done 2 hackathons this year, I think. They're 4 or 5 days long. And the goal of that is essentially, anything that's been kind of gnawing on you with the product that you're working on, this is that opportunity to be like, oh, I wonder if we could turn that into an agent. How do we make this an agentic workflow versus right now we just have a UI, right? So we do get opportunities like that where we can spend some time and be like, hey, what do you guys think? And I was actually really surprised this last one we had, 2 or 3 of them are on our roadmap to then productionize. So it's kind of like a really good mechanism. I think it should be considered a cost of doing business, not a business leaders think it's giving away free payroll, right? This is the cost of innovation. This is the cost of doing business. Let your engineers have so many ideas all the time, they can never execute on all of them. give them a little bit of time and you'll get some value creation back, right?
One of the things, and I know you've got thoughts on this and you were talking about using it a little bit, but Danny, you'll laugh too, because it just feels like everybody was talking about MCPs nonstop a couple of months ago. And it's not that people aren't talking about it or people are over it now, but I feel like the intense hype piece of this has sort of subsided, and now people are just like looking for those practical use cases. So I'm curious, like, Wes, what your experiences are. Like, are you using MCP servers in your day-to-day life, like, or your day-to-day job? Are you having issues with them? How are you overcoming them? Like, where are these factoring into your AI usage nowadays?
So I think for our team, I think I'm speculating here, but if you are adopting AI as much as you can, you may not be talking about MCPs right now because it's just part of your core workflow now. So I know we're using it every single day. Amazon Q usage, we have metrics to make sure we're all ramping up using it, being more productive with it. I'm always kind of tinkering. What are the latest MCP servers that are coming out? Small plug to AWS Labs. They have a MCP repo that they just keep adding more and more services, and those are essentially, most of them are plugging into AWS services. So using natural language to be like, hey, get me the CloudWatch logs for this log group. I had downtime from X to Y. Do you detect any anomalies with log events between these two time frames? Or, hey, this is my proposed architecture, used cost analysis to tell me how much it may cost on a per yearly basis based on this amount of usage. By the way, I don't know my usage, but here's what I suspect. Go do research and tell me what you think. So there's MCP servers are new. I think maybe the buzz around it being new is maybe died down, but there's probably still only a small percentage of use cases that are being fulfilled by what it has to offer. Yeah, that's probably, again, pure speculation, but that's kind of my theory is like, no, folks are using it, right? And they're still trying to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Danny.
I was gonna say, I don't know. In all my circles and everyone I talk to, we're talking about MCPs literally all the time. I'm still enamored by it. I love all the use cases that I've been able to find out about it. Matter of fact, literally yesterday, I went out to a lunch with 3 other executives, just like buddies that we've made, play pickleball together and whatnot. And we were all geeking about MCP servers and how they're like rolling it out within their organization. So maybe it's at the Fortune 500 level more than it is like the average, and especially because, and it's interesting too around AI. Like some people I talk to, they're all in on AI, and some people are like, yeah, I've heard of it, and it reminds you of like what the bubble that is social media truly is, because there's this whole group that they have the interest to want to get involved, and they're just barely scratching the surface, and then there's this other group that has like thrown hundreds of thousands of dollars at it at this point, just trying to like improve things. And even some of the conversations of people that I've talked to, one prime example was one person at that lunch yesterday. Their company invested a tremendous amount of money in AI to where they're seeing massive productivity gains to the point where they're now thinking about their second round of investing in it to kind of just keep improving things. It's very, very interesting. So I'm still all in on MCPs, especially because the way that you can leverage it for better use cases. The one example that I often give even for it is, imagine you have a global team, and let's say one part of that team is located in South America, and they're writing localized documentation in their local dialect, right? Let's say, using the example of like Chile as a country that maybe you have developers in. As they're writing it out, well, if you were to just give this to, let's say, the average translator, there's some words that they use that are normal within local dialect that would be translated completely incorrectly. One example of which that I love referencing is empanada, right? And so directly translated, it's a pastry that has meat stuffed inside. It's delicious, and you could tell I've had my fair share. And so I'm an expert on empanadas. So, but another way that it's used, so for example, let's say the documentation said, if you remove this microservice, it's dependent upon another service is dependent upon it. So if you remove it, you'll be in an empanada, which is the way that they often use it. And direct translation would be, you're now in a meat pastry. It may change the whole meaning of the documentation from going from, let's say, an insurance company to now going to a kitchen restaurant supply kind of company, right? But the reality is, the way that they use it locally is, you're now in a pickle, you're now in a jam, you're now in a tough situation. So you've put yourself in a tough situation by removing said microservice. So that would be a great way, an example of how an MCP server now referencing your documentation, your information, before it consults the World Wide Web and all the training that these models have. It's getting its context first prior to translation from all your localized documentation to give it a better context of what these translations should be. So now on a global team, of course, if it consults your docs, it knows very well that you're not in the restaurant business. It knows that you're in the insurance business. It can then contextually give you a more accurate reply based on that. So I think just stuff like that, it just blows my mind to see ways that we were doing things before and the ways and the doors this opens up after this. The way global teams can basically be significantly closer, I think, is phenomenal. But there's so many more layers of use case that can go in there for an enterprise level organization that I just see it as like on almost necessity if you're using AI in any way, shape, or form. And as a side, if you're in a company and if you're like a leader and or executive listening to this, if you haven't given your teams AI tools, I'm telling you right now, a developer is Googling something or using AI in a way with your company data because you haven't provided it to them. You need to get on board and provide them something. Otherwise, you're going to have all this PII out there because you haven't put any safeguards in place. Shadow AI is a real thing right now. So you need to be paying attention to that.
Yeah, +1, and I would just add to that, like, I think what I hope the conversation is right now, we were talking about, is the MCP hype over? I like to think I'm seeing more conversations about, hey, these MCP servers are not secure by design. You have to jump through a lot of hoops if you're making an MCP server for your business. So Danny just talking about, exposing information to the greater net or to whatever AI service that you're just Googling or using. Our team, we're building an MCP server right now, and we have to think about threat modeling in a different way. Luckily, there's changes to the spec that are coming out that are making it more secure. But that doesn't mean your job is done, right? So, would highly recommend just looking into, okay, what's the authorization look like if it's talking to a service? How potentially could you use like prompt injection, right? Like all of kind of the pen testing, white hat thinking here to make sure that if you are building MCP servers for just inside your enterprise, security didn't go away, right? Those underlying services need to be secure, and how your MCP server is interacting with prompts, calling this tooling, right, and so on.
Yeah, I would say that I'm still pretty firmly convicted that companies need to be looking into building MCP servers for their products to bridge the gap, because I think agents are going to be the primary way that we all engage with a lot of services in the near future, if not already. But yeah, I guess I was getting more to this idea that I've seen a lot of the dialogue kind of switch from what these things could do in a magical sense to like what they're doing for me now. And one of the biggest pain points I hear from people all the time, and it's a bit like what you said, Wes, is how do I even install this? And I think how does the auth work? Like, some people are just having problems using them. Some of that's a skill issue and a training issue, but some of that is just people are rushing to get these things out there, and some of the places to dock them aren't as far along maybe as they should be. I feel like that's an opportunity for people that are developing the next set of agents that people are using to engage generally. Is just, how they integrate MCPs. It has to be first and foremost. And I think there's a lot of agents that people use day to day that just still have not built good integrations for this stuff yet. And I think some people just kind of get a bit fed up with it sometimes when they're just trying to use something and it just will not work.
Right. No, that's such a good point. And I think when you said, installing it can be an issue. And I really think, if a user has gotten over that hump and they've been able to install it, the biggest thing that I see is there's like almost like a separate training you have to do for yourself to figure out how you actually call it. right? How do you make sure that you're actually prompting it in the correct way? And if you're just using an MCP server and you're using it with Klein, let's say, and you've picked a particular model, the way that you prompt it, if you use a different model, may not be the same. You know, if you use that exact same prompt, you may get a different answer. So I think MCP servers are so critical for AI to start interacting with all of the other tooling we've already built. But to your point, now the next phase is, okay, how can we make it easy for users? Agentic workflows that use those MCP servers, where the agent is kind of helping the user along the way. It knows how to prompt the MCP servers. It has all of that context. You know, you're able to use models that you can control with those agents. And then that way, you know, you're not some users like, I don't know, I have 20 MCP servers. I don't know how I get the job done. How do I tell it the right things in natural language to get to the end goal? Agents are going to be kind of that next frontier. Agents that are secure, that are small, that are not using large language models, that are using small ones, that are fine-tuned to the problem space, and are prompt optimized, right? To get the most accuracy, the least amount of tokens used, and theoretically even get those models on device, so now you're not even calling the cloud.
Should more developers be making agents? Or like, is that even a weird question to ask? Like, I don't know. What do you think? Should more people be building agents?
No, because I don't want competition.
That's definitely a point for sure. Like agents are getting hotter and hotter right now. Everyone wants to make one. I would say it really comes down to what's the core pain point you're solving for your customer. It may not be an agent at all, right? I think really being heavily integrated, this is kind of an Amazon mantra culture, is being customer obsessed. Like, it very well may not make sense for your customer, for your user to have an agent. You know, I think we're still trying to discover what are agent use cases, and you know, someone could make the case. It's like, well, you know, maybe my customer doesn't know it needs an agent. Well, you know, I don't want to get into a full product discussion, but is the agent solving the pain point? Yes or no? Is it solving their problem faster, more accurately, better? If the agent has a massive LLM that it's connected to, and you're waiting, you know, there's an MIT study on developer productivity where it's basically like the amount of time that sometimes these models that a developer is waiting for the solution versus having them just completed the task, right? That agent spent 10 minutes to write 10 lines of code that you could have just, quote, you know, Stack Overflowed it or some other way and then written it, right? So I think that should be at the core, is what is the workflow that the agent is doing? Is that going to be faster and better for the customer? And then that should answer the question, should you build an agent or not?
I mean, I think the question kind of goes to anything. Should you build X for the sake of building X? And I think the way that I justify building agents or not needing to build it is, do you know the core problem yet? And oftentimes that will yield the results. Now, as far as productivity, I see it across the board pretty frequently. But I will say one thing, that there are some things that just don't need to be agentified. There are just some things that it just makes no sense. There's one thing that I'm trying to get through to a lot of developers, and it's like a psychological thing here. Let's say, for example, the three of us are working on a team, right? And I was stuck on a problem. I was like really, really stuck. It's a straight up blocker, and I don't know how to progress past this. But y'all have an idea. So we jump on a call, and you're just pair programming it with me, right? And I give you this code, and you're like, okay, I know how to work past this. And you're working past, let's say I got 80% of the way there, and you help me work past the last 20%. We're working through whatever duct tape and WD-40 level code that I put together to solve this problem, right? And we got there, and we're very happy with the results. But when it comes to AI, and let's say the AI gets us 80% of the way there, we are now stuck in this mindset of, oh, we must keep reprompting over and over to get the last 20. We're not satisfied with the fact that a 3-day task got cut down 80%, and now it's only taking us a few hours, and I just have to manually go in and fix the last 20% of remaining of code. That's not satisfaction to us. No, the AI must get all the way to the 100% in order for me to feel satisfied. And this is what I'm starting to see more and more of a big issue in regards to people leveraging AI and not understanding how to utilize it in the best ways possible. Sure, if it gets to 100% of the way there, that's a home run. That's an amazing experience. But 80% is not something like, oh my God, this is trash. It's like, dude, it was going to take me 3 days. Now a 3-day task is now brought down to what? 2, maybe 4 hours, 5 hours? Why is that not considered a win at that point? It's not a win because it didn't get you 100% of the way there. That's why when I often see developers say, oh, my job is still safe. It's like, no, AI is not writing terrible code at this point. Like, it's not the way it was in the beginning. It's come significantly far at this point. Why are you not leveraging it to save yourself that 80% of time, that, especially on the stuff that you didn't even like as a developer to begin with in the beginning anyway, and then going in the last 20% of the areas where it's really deep thought to kind of connect things and integrate it the way that you'd want? That's a home run. That's an easy win. So this is something I often try to bring up in terms of what AI could potentially do, or like whether you should be thinking about agenty or building an agent for something. It's what is that use case? I personally don't care for chatbots. That was pre-AI too. We always had chatbots in some way, shape, or form. It's never been my bag, but I do think that there are other areas where it truly makes sense to have agents, like maybe building an internal code reviewer where you're verifying that it's actually worth the time of a developer to finally review this thing. Instead of bothering them, they realize it's incomplete, they send it back. Why not have an agent there that's verifying it and saving developer time? That's an easy win in any organization as far as I'm concerned. Stuff like that.
I think this is another one of those things too where I think my advice differs for what I would say to a company versus what I would say to an individual. For a company, I think you guys are absolutely right. I mean, I think you proceed with caution. One of the biggest issues and the reasons why I actually think developers should be building more agents is the same reason why I don't know if companies should be. And that is that agents don't have nearly the moat around them that people think they do, right? So many things that exist out there in the software world, the platform world, it's very difficult to recreate them because that company built it already and they're sprinting faster ahead of you than you can catch up to them. That is not the case with AI and agents. Like, you'd be surprised how not far ahead something like a root code or a cursor really is at the end of the day as an agent versus something that you could build. And so while a lot of people don't even realize that they're using ChatGPT, the agent, when they could be maybe building their own agentic wrapper around OpenAI, specifically geared towards a particular problem or task that they're trying to solve repeatedly. And I think you'll learn a lot about AI by building an agent. And I also think there's actually a lot of utility for building small, thin, customized agents that solve particular business problems that you as an individual have. Then yes, if your company has problems that it can solve or your customers do, keep doing that exploration. But I think as developers, in the same way you might have written an NPM script that you use all the time to automate something that you do, I think developers are underutilizing agents because they feel like maybe they have to train a model or fine-tune something, or there's some deep technical reason they can't build one. I think people need to play with that. I think they'd be surprised how easy it is to at least break into it. Not necessarily write one that everyone's going to pay $1 million for, but to break into that space and do something useful, it's easier than you think it is, or at least it's more straightforward than you think it is.
So there's something that I'm seeing with agent frameworks that I think moats are going to come back. And there's this new framework out that's called DSPy, DSPy, and it is essentially a prompt optimizer. And it also has kind of like a really interesting kind of structured way to define your input. So I'll kind of give an example. So let's say you ask ChatGPT, hey, I need the answer to this math equation, whatever it is, doesn't matter. And you are going to get some chain of thought reasoning of how it solved it, and then at the end, it's probably going to give you an answer. Okay, now let's say you did a different type of model. Maybe it would have a different explanation, and then maybe it says the answer up front. There's all this variance and kind of, non-deterministic tendencies around these answers. How can you build an LM program or an agent around that? What DSPy does is it allows you to define a schema for your input and say, hey, I am going to give you a question and answer, and I want the output to be a float, right? You define that output, and it can just be just like an inline, hey, string and float, or it could be like an entire object model as your input. Like let's say a bunch of PDFs, or I don't know, like you've somehow tokenized like blog posts and you have an input as title, subheading, description, right? And then maybe the answer is some sort of sentiment. But the sentiment can only be an enum of happy, sad, right? That framework will allow you to basically run an LM program and have that exact signature for that output, sad, right? So that's the first thing that it really does that is just, I think, mind-blowing for agents right now, because it's so kind of probabilistic and unknown, various models that you use, etc. The next thing is if you can give it examples of those various structures of input and outputs, and maybe this is like, you know, some proprietary information within your company that you want to make an agent for. Well, now, you know, that proprietary data is now valuable again, because now you can use those examples to then optimize via reinforcement learning to the most accurate prompt that can be optimized per model. So no matter what model it is, you can find some sort of optimized prompt for that. You know, reduce costs. Potentially you could use smaller models to get the same accuracy as a larger model. So, you know, the scaffolding and these agents, you know, there's no moat around that, right? Everyone can just pull these down, even have a coding agent build these agents for you. Now, when it comes to what's the experience like, what's the cost, what's the performance, we're now coming back to data as king again, where, you know, I think this is still early days. I think we might see more of this late kind of Q4 in 2026, where there are going to be agents that are going to be either fine-tuned or prompt optimized, and be able to run on much smaller form factors, smaller models, physical AI, and that sort of thing. So I'm optimistic that you know, startups and teams are going to be able to find moats again with their workflows.
Wes, this was a great conversation. I think people might have a lot of questions, or, you know, want to hear more about kind of the things that you're doing with AI or what they could be doing. Where can people find you online? Where can we send them?
Yeah, so definitely follow me on X at Wes Ecklan, WESEKLUND. And that's probably where I'm most active. So definitely hit me up on there. DMs are open. Happy to chat.
Awesome. And of course, we'll make sure that the links are in the show notes, so you don't have to worry about repeating that and writing it down. We'll make sure that it's clickable for you. But that's going to be it for us today. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Modern Web Podcast. Thanks, of course, to our guest, Wes. As always, we say this conversation does not stop here. Find Wes online at the links down below. As for me, you can find me online at RoboCell. For Danny, you can find him online at DThompsonDev. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. As we close out, we would just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time. We would like me to remind you that This. Is dedicated to guiding companies through their modernization and AI transformation journeys. This.Labs is a tech consultancy that specializes in amplifying your technical capabilities, whether it's expanding your dev team with seasoned professionals or streamlining your project's journey from ideation to deployment. We've worked with clients like Google, Microsoft, PayPal, and more. Check us out online at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. All right, see y'all, everybody, next time.
Thanks, guys. Till next time. Appreciate it.